Now, Father John, as you well know, is an internationally recognized voice and leader for peace and nonviolence. John has traveled the war zones around the world, and he has given thousands of lectures on peace. Somehow he doesn't look old enough to have done all that. In 2015, John helped organize the Vatican Conference on Nonviolence in Rome, and he also helped to draft Pope Francis's World Day of Peace message on nonviolence of January 1st, 2017. And I believe he's also working with Pope Francis on other projects at this time. John is a staff member of Pace e Bene, and is a co-author of Campaign Violence. Every September, he helps organize a national week of action with over 2,000 nonviolent demonstrations against poverty, war, racism, the manufacturing of weapons, and environmental destruction across the United States. John, because of his call and his passion for peace and nonviolent resistance, he has been arrested over 80 times, all for the cause of peace. That's putting your mouth where your words are and where your feet should be. John firmly believes, as evidenced by his words, his actions, and his very life, and I quote, that peace is not something static, but rather to make peace is to engage mind, body, and spirit. Archbishop Desmond Tutu wrote of him, John Deere is the embodiment of a peacemaker. And so now, please join me in welcoming Father John Deere.
Bonjour, bonjour, buenos dias. Je ne parle pas français. Je ne parle pas espagnol. Je ne comprends pas anglais, también. So, is this working now? Yeah. This is reminds me of the sad story of the young priest giving his first sermon, and he's very nervous, like I am in front of you, holy peacemakers. And he comes up and he says, something's wrong with this microphone. And the congregation goes, and also with you. I hope that's not the situation today. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Thank you, Sister Doris, and thank you for welcoming me here. It's such a blessing for me to be here with you, holy peacemakers. And if all I want to say is just thank you, thank you, thank you. Merci beaucoup for all that you do. For all that you do for your people, for justice, for peace, for our poor church, our poor world, and our poor God. You know, and I just want to encourage you to go for it, you know, just to keep at it. And I am so impressed by your statement on nonviolence. That's really, when I read that, Sister sent it to me, I thought, wow, I want to join the Holy Cross. You're not very American. Oh, I better not say that. Well, I'm sorry, I forgot. I'm only 1 minute into it. I'm all right. It's just terrific. It's really, really great. And please call me John, because my name is so darn goofy. Father Deere just doesn't work. I don't know if my bad jokes come through in the French or the Spanish translation. No, I don't think they are, but you're not missing much. And if I talk too fast, please stand up and try to tell me. Yeah, it's just so beautiful and wonderful what you've written. And, well, maybe, I mean, I think this is so exciting to get together for a day on nonviolence. And this is what you've all committed to, what you've been living all your lives. And I'm just here at your service to help you and nudge you and encourage you. You already know all of this. And I can just, give you a few pointers or some questions. Does everybody have a copy of the schedule, Doris? Or no? So it's posted on the door. So maybe I could talk a little bit about that. This morning, say a little bit about myself and violence and nonviolence in general. And theoretically, this morning we'll talk about, till lunch, nonviolence in general from various different ways. Doesn't that sound lovely? And then if we're good, we get food. And then at 1:30, we come back and we'll start looking at Jesus and nonviolence. And I thought I'd just say some overviews about the life of Jesus, and then we could look at the Sermon on the Mount. And then we'll have breaks in small groups at various points. And then about 4:30, we'll have Mass. And we'll look at Luke 10. Remember Luke 10, where Jesus sends the 72 out as missionaries of nonviolence. Doesn't that sound great? And we could end the day like that. And by the end of the day, we will have resolved everything. I'm trying to make them laugh, Doris, and it's not working. It's just not working. Oh, I'm doing fine. I don't think so. But, well, nonviolence is at the heart of the message of Jesus. This is what you wrote. Nonviolence is intrinsic to right relationship with creation. Wow. Nonviolent systemic change requires contemplative, innovative responses to social problems, conflicts. We support nonviolent means of conflict resolution, stopping discrimination of any kind, generating an equitable economic system for all, fostering a culture of global solidarity and just peace, protecting Mother Earth and life in all her diversity, examining the quality of our interpersonal relationships through nonviolence, through Jesus, owning the complexity inherent in our struggle to live without violence, engaging in profound interior transformation, countering a culture of individualism, greed, exclusion, and exploitation, embracing interdependence, diversity, and commitment to the common good, and to lead by unifying. That's your mission, you all. It's fantastic. Congratulations. And Ramon, you're like committing yourselves for like 6 years. 5 years. One's already down. To embody and live this mission of nonviolence. Is that right? Am I getting the picture here? Well, we're counting on you to transform the whole world then. Today, I invite you to be apostles of nonviolence. I invite you to be visionaries of gospel nonviolence. I invite you to be missionaries of nonviolence, wherever you are, to our broken world. Isn't that exciting? And that's the way after all you've been through, your whole life when you were a kid and you entered the order and then you were in Haiti or you were in Peru or you're in Africa or you're in Manchester, New Hampshire. Okay. Your work is not done. This is going to be your finest hour. And what's so darn exciting about you all is that you're doing this together as a community. You're breaking new ground in the church. Don't get me started on the male religious orders or the priesthood, and we won't even mention the bishops. No, I thought you'd laugh at that, but maybe I touched a nerve. Maybe I touched a nerve. You're breaking new ground, and this is what we're trying to get Pope Francis to call the world to do, and I thank you for it. So I'm just here as your friend, and just here to help, happy to talk in any which way. And there's so much to talk. And if you don't interrupt me, I'll just keep talking till 5 o'clock. As you see, I have the gift. Whatever today would be helpful, as I'm talking about all of these things? How do you define nonviolence? What does it mean for you? I mean, as I'm up here talking, you can take this in every which way, and if you get really bored, you can take it in different ways. For example, where are you personally on the path of gospel nonviolence? Where is it challenging you? How did you start turning from the culture of violence and the life of violence down the path of nonviolence? When did that happen to you? Where is nonviolence challenging you right now? Because, of course, we're all for peace, love, and nonviolence, but there's somebody you would like to get back at with a little revenge. I'm just saying. And, or how can you help the community become the light of nonviolence to Montreal in Canada? It's such an important place in the world. Or Haiti, or Peru, or wherever you are. And this is an all-new way of looking at our life as peacemakers, our life as followers of the nonviolent Jesus. Lovely, lovely things. How are you a peacemaker? How has your life been a vocation of peacemaking? How have you been helping your people out of the culture of violence and war? Transforming them from being trained war makers to gospel peacemakers. Lovely things to think about. That's what I invite you to think about. And how can you be a person of gospel nonviolence, an apostle of nonviolence for the rest of your life? I'm a big name dropper, so forgive me, but I went to see the great Archbishop Tutu a few years ago. He's my friend in South Africa. Went all the way. And I go there, and he's a little tiny guy, Archbishop Tutu. And I walk into the room to see the great man who's my friend, and there's no hello, how are you? Did you have a good trip? He comes up to me and grabs me by the shoulder, Desmond Tutu, and goes, John, you and I have to work for justice and peace till the day we die. Are there any questions? I think that's kind of the whole day right there in a nutshell. I was quite shocked by that, and that's what we're talking about here. So, just a word about the world. And the way I've been operating is, it's kind of my mantra. 50 years ago, the United States government assassinated the holy apostle of nonviolence, Martin Luther King. And then just the night before, he gave the famous speech, and one of his last words were, I want you all to hear this. Martin Luther King said, the choice is no longer violence or nonviolence. That's not what we're talking about. Well, what, Martin? It's nonviolence or non-existence. Is nonviolence or non-existence. That's the last words of Martin Luther King to the world. And I think that's what we're seeing every single day, and that's what you all are living through. And it's a difficult word, nonviolence. But his other word is non-existence. Unless the whole human race becomes nonviolent now, we are doomed to our self-destructive violence. And that's where we're headed right now. A world of permanent warfare. 35 wars. My country is bombing 7 nations today, but we sell weapons to both sides in all wars. It's all about money. We have 16,000 nuclear weapons on the planet, good to go. We can blow the planet up 17 times. And every form of violence you can imagine, you all know the whole litany. Sexism, racism, torture, executions. But global systemic poverty, leaving all the people you're serving, 4 billion people without food, water, housing, health care, jobs, dignity. No, the UN says minimally 800 million people are starving to death. Doesn't that just boggle the mind? No. Permanent warfare on Mother Earth and the creatures. We're going to make 6 million species extinct in the next 25 years alone. That's why Dr. King is right, and why what you're talking about is so important. what are we going to do as the world heads toward non-existence? Well, you are apostles of the nonviolent Jesus. And to the day we die, according to Archbishop Tutu, we're going to let our light shine. We're going to be missionaries of gospel nonviolence. We're going to sow seeds of nonviolence all over and around the world. So it's like we're living in the zombie movie. Does that translate into French? It's like everybody's crazy. Certainly in the United States, it's happening. We're all crazy with violence. We have internalized violence. We live and breathe violence. We hit our kids and encourage them to go kill and be killed. It's insanity. And it's structured, and it's institutionalized, and it's systemic, and it's spiritualized. God wants us to kill those people. It's insanity. We're talking about sanity. Now, I don't know how to talk about this, but you know the 12-step movement for alcoholics? This is a meeting today of Violence Anonymous. Hi, I'm John. I'm addicted to violence. Because we're all stuck in violence, and we're turning to our higher power. We're making restitution, and you and I, as missionaries and apostles of nonviolence, are going to help the world become sober people of nonviolence. These are different ways of looking at it. Now, my friend Daniel Berrigan were here. He'd say, what we're talking about is death. Death as a social methodology. We bring good things to death. And you and I are saying no more. No more death, no more killing, no more of the metaphors of death, means of death, which is poverty. You know all about this and all the things. So I'm saying these things to give you a framework. If it's helpful, I hope it's helpful. I don't know. But what's so darn exciting in this terrible moment is we've got Martin Luther King, Dorothy Day, Mahatma Gandhi, Rosa Parks. You name it, Tutu. The greatest people in history are telling us there's a way out. There's a way forward. There's a way through active, creative nonviolence. And that's what gives me hope. This is our hope, is this methodology. And so I want to talk a little bit about what that means. I want to tell you a little bit of my own journey to this. And I'm not sure even how to do it, so maybe I'll just tell you a little bit about myself and then talk about nonviolence. So this is just, if you missed this in the translation, you're not missing much. I'm 58 years old. I'm from the United States. I'm so sorry. I come from a very politically aware family. My father was the head of the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. And when Martin Luther King was killed, my mother woke me up. We were out the night before at 5 o'clock and said, they killed Dr. King. It's time for you to get up. This was 5 a.m. I don't know. And she made me watch TV, and then my dad took me down to see the riots and said, you're never to forget that. And it's strange because, and then after we killed Robert Kennedy, I went into a kind of, as a boy, an existential funk or a crisis. So that by the time I was in college and I was studying Dr. King at Duke, I decided, well, if they kill the greatest person our country has produced, there's nothing you can do. So I might as well just give my whole life to Jesus. And my next thought was, oh no, I'm going to have to become a Jesuit. I don't know how I went from, anyway, we better not even go there. And I went to see my parents as a dopey 20-year-old kid and said, Mom, Dad, I'm going to become a Jesuit. And my mother went, where did we go wrong? What? He had so much potential. And they begged me not to. And to wait a year. Actually worked for the Kennedys for a year. And I got a little bit of money, and I thought, what am I going to do? And I thought, I know, if I'm going to spend my life following this guy, I want to get to know the lay of the land. So I go back to my parents. Mom, Dad, I'm going to go hitchhiking through Israel for 3 months to see where Jesus lived. And my mother went, it's worse than we thought. It's true. She still thinks that. And the week I left, Israel invaded Lebanon. Do you remember the summer war of 1982? And I went on an empty airplane, because all the Holy Land tours were canceled. It was full-on war. It was all orchestrated at the Pentagon. We killed 60,000 people in 3 months. I'm a dopey 21-year-old kid with just my Bible. I get off the plane, and I hitchhiked from Jerusalem to Bethlehem to Nazareth, and it was great. My goal was to go to the Sea of Galilee, and if you've been there, it's very beautiful. It's a lot different now than it was summer 1982. And what happened to me was it was a Wednesday afternoon, and I make my way to the North Shore. There's a hill and a little chapel the size of this room. You've been there? And there's nobody for miles and miles on a Wednesday afternoon in July 1982. And I walk into the church, and it said on the wall of the church, like graffiti, in the church, it said, "Blessed are the poor." And I went, what is that about? And I looked over, and it said, "Blessed are those who mourn." And I look over here, and it says, "Blessed are the meek, the gentle, the nonviolent. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. Wow. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those persecuted for working for justice." On the altar, it says, "Love your enemies." It was the chapel of the Beatitudes. And I was utterly overwhelmed by this. This was not on my plan. And I said out loud in the church, "Oh my God, I think he's serious." I thought that was pretty funny. And I walked out on the balcony looking out over the whole Sea of Galilee. And when you're hitchhiking for 3 months on holy pilgrimage, you get wackier than usual. And I'm talking to God, and I'm going, "Are you kidding me, God? This is the plan? Like, you want me to live these Beatitudes in the Sermon on the Mount? Isn't that the job for the Sisters of the Holy Cross?" My plan was to be a pious Jesuit, which you may think is an oxymoron. I don't know if that came through in the translation. And I thought, I was really cut to the heart by this. I never thought about these words before. And I said out loud on the balcony, looking out at the Sea of Galilee, "Okay, God, I'll give my life to the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount for the rest of my life. Thank you very much." On one condition. Wasn't that brilliant? If you give me a sign. This was a sure sign I was called to be a Jesuit, because I was looking for a loophole. Because I could say I tried, but you didn't come through. Anyway, all of a sudden there were these loud explosions as 3 big black Israeli jets just then fell from the sky, breaking the sound barrier, setting off sonic booms, boom, 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 and swooped down over the Sea of Galilee and dropped bombs 15 miles away in Lebanon. And it changed my life. I was kind of like, okay, I work for peace and justice. I'll never. And I just invite you to imagine seeing warfare at the place where Jesus taught these things. I think I've spent my life looking back at that moment to understand what happened. This is why I am the way I am. And I think I opened my eyes subconsciously for a split second after hearing the Beatitudes in case God appeared. And what did I see? Was the reality of the world, which is mass murder. Sisters and brothers killing sisters and brothers all over the planet as if it's totally normal, reasonable, legitimate, meticulously legal, in the name of God, in the name of Jesus, even at the place where he said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." But it had been going on every hour. I realized only much later. The bombs had been happening the whole time, and I didn't notice, because who cares? It's just killing. Who cares? You care, and I care, and that's what we're... So I entered the Jesuits and joined every peace and justice group, and then I went and sat at the feet of my friends and teachers, Fathers Daniel and Philip Berrigan. Do some of you know who they were? They were the leading voices against the Vietnam War. They were in prison. They were on the cover of Time magazine. So if you are a friend of the Berrigans, Father Daniel Berrigan, it's a requirement of friendship to get arrested. So I'm 21 years old, and he's like, "Go get arrested at the Pentagon, kid, and report back." This is the priest. And so I went, and now you've heard I've been arrested about 80 times. At least twice a year, that's my methodology, in and out of court. And in 1993, with Philip Berrigan, I walked onto a big military Air Force base, right through 10,000 soldiers, up to one of the big F-15 fighter bombers that carries nuclear weapons. And I went up to it, and I took out a hammer, and I went up to the side and hammered on it, as you do. As I said to the judge later, "Your Honor, I'm just doing what it says in the Bible. Isaiah said someday they're going to come along and beat swords into plowshares and study war no more. Where did I go wrong, sister?" Or I said to the judge, "Your Honor, I'm just doing what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. Love your enemies, don't nuke them." That's the actual translation from the original Greek. I'm trying to make you laugh here, and it's not working. So for that action, I faced 20 years in prison. I've done about a year in prison, and the government of the United States considers me as high up a terrorist as you can be. I can never vote again. I'm totally monitored by the United States, and I'm not allowed to travel some places. So you know, according to the Canadian law, convicted felons, criminals from the United States are not allowed in Canada. And yesterday, as I flew in from New Mexico, your security let me in. So I'm concerned about Canadian security. I think you should report me. Well, all I'm trying to say is I'm really happy to be here with you this morning. Thank you. No. Yeah, in 1985, I went to live and work in El Salvador under the direction of the Jesuits at the university. Do you remember the 6 Jesuits who were assassinated in 1989? So they were my friends and teachers. And they sent me into a refugee camp right where the war was happening. And they told me my job was, when the death squads come in, we'll send out the young white gringo American, and maybe they'll kill him. You know, like they were kind of hoping and they won't kill the poor people because the American seminarian was there. So talk about working through your nonviolence fast. My whole strategy of nonviolence was to play the dumb American, which you see comes easy with me. Here comes these kids with machine guns. And I was like, "Hi, good morning. You need some coffee?" And they were just like, "Well, this guy's nuts." And they would walk away. It's the cognitive dissonance. Okay, that didn't work. I'm just trying to... And, I was, for years, working for the largest peace group in the country and the world, Fellowship of Reconciliation, and led a delegation of Nobel Peace Prize winners to Iraq. When September 11th happened, I went down to volunteer, and the Red Cross asked me to coordinate all the chaplains working with people. And I worked at Ground Zero for 3 months, 24/7. And on Saturday afternoons, I organized the main demonstrations in New York City against the bombing of Afghanistan. And the New York Times wrote about me, ministering to the relatives, organizing demonstrations against the war, And so many Catholics complained to the Cardinal and the Jesuits, I was kicked out of New York, which has been my life story, getting kicked out. So I had friends in New Mexico. Do you know where that is? Near Arizona, in the desert. And they said, when they finally kick you out, come to the desert of New Mexico, because who cares? So I live in a very remote place now on a mountaintop, but I've been organizing and traveling the world. And we have a campaign at Los Alamos where they build all the nuclear weapons, and business is booming there. But my big question all along is, what do we do? And the language is a problem for me. Love doesn't work, that word, love, even though this is what we're talking about. And the word peace doesn't work. I have spoken at Los Alamos in the high school to the children whose parents build nuclear weapons. Thank you, sister. And they tell me they're the greatest people of peace in the planet because they're protecting the United States from everybody by we spend trillions of dollars for war. Hitler was all for peace. Barack Obama won the Nobel Peace Prize and gave the greatest speech for war in history. And I don't know if you know Harry Potter, that book? Yeah. I like the phrase, he who shall not be named. The U.S. president. All for peace. And everybody is for love. I love my car. I love that TV show. Nobody uses this terrible, clumsy, awkward word, nonviolence, except for Mahatma Gandhi and Dorothy Day and Martin Luther King. And I think there's a reason for that. And that's why I invite you to use this difficult, clumsy word. And about the translation, having been in France and all, I don't know what your word in French for nonviolence is, la non-violence. Yeah, but I don't think that works. I think you have to call it active nonviolence. Active nonviolence? Doesn't, huh? Nonviolence active. And what about in Spanish? La non-violencia activa. I think you have to say both because in the language, we in the United States have Martin Luther King. And when you say nonviolence, oh, well, you're thinking Martin Luther King, and look at that guy, he's active. But in other places where you're using the word, you might think it means passive. It's not passivity. We're not talking about doing nothing. This is active, public, creative, daring, courageous, the bravest thing of all, active nonviolence, nonviolence active, la non-violencia activa. That's correct? Yes. Okay. That's what we're talking about. So if Martin Luther King were here, I'd be going, nonviolence is about love and truth. Nonviolence is a spiritual path to the God of peace and a new future of peace. It's a social methodology for positive social change that always works. And Martin would go, John doesn't know what he's talking about. He'd say, active nonviolence is power. Power. We are not powerless. This is the power of God, the methodology of God to change the world. This is what I'm talking about. And this is what Gandhi and Dr. King talked about morning, noon, and night. It's the power of love and truth together. But it's a problem of language to talk about this. This is what I'm saying. And I invite you, and even today, as we're talking and meeting, to define it. How do you define nonviolence? And if it's the power of God, the way of God, the methodology of God, God's intention and will for the whole human race, for all the creatures, and all of Mother Earth and the universe, God's realm of nonviolence, then we don't know what we're talking about. Because this is brand new, by the way. Brand new. Now, So having tried to struggle with this, I've come up with a little framework of talking about nonviolence. And that's what I want to use this morning. And it's based on my book, The Nonviolent Life, if you humor me here for a minute. Because even when I read your lists, it's such a big to-do list. It's hard to grasp it. So this is what I want to pitch to you, and it's really simple. Now, what I'm also offering you this morning when we talk about nonviolence, if you want, is a way for you to talk about nonviolence when you go home. Okay? I've tried this out after 40 years. This is my simple way of putting it, Gandhi and Dr. King. And here's my whole thesis in a nutshell about nonviolence. Are you sitting down? Yeah. Okay. Nonviolence requires 3 simultaneous attributes. You have to do all 3, and nobody does all 3. But you have to do them at the same time. You can't just say, I'm going to work on being a peaceful person for the rest of my life. That's not nonviolence. You have to do all 3. Number 1, and this is how you can talk about it. Number 1, we're going to be really nonviolent to ourselves. At the same time, number 2, we're going to practice perfect, meticulous, interpersonal nonviolence toward every human being on the planet and the creatures and Mother Earth. How's that going for you? That's just number 2. Did you get that down? Nonviolence to every human being, all the creatures, and Mother Earth. But there's third, number 3. You have to have one foot in the global grassroots movement of nonviolence. You have to be involved in the movement for change. Well, I can see you didn't like my 3 attributes. See, here's the thing. A lot of us are good at one of them, maybe 2 of them. But who reaches the level of Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi and Dorothy Day, where you're doing all 3? And that's what you and I are going to do. And Sister Ramon, that's what you're telling us the order is calling you to do. And we're going to form all our people. I'll just give you Montreal and Canada to work on. But if you want to include Haiti and Peru and Africa, you can. To become people of holistic, total nonviolence. Now, why not? Why not think big? You've already said all of that in your form. But do you see this framework that I'm giving you? And so what I want to do is spend about 20 minutes talking about nonviolence to ourselves. I think we're going to have a conversation. Then we're going to take a nice break. And then till lunch, I want to do the second one, nonviolence in all our relationships, the earth, and nonviolence part of the movement. So I'm just giving you this framework. And then after lunch, we're going to look at Jesus, how he taught all of that. Does that sound okay? And you can take this however you want. Now, where are you on this spectrum? So, for example, I remember I was 23, and I gave my first speech in a church in Connecticut, and this nice lady stood up in front of everybody, and she said, I'm going to be working at being perfectly peaceful for the rest of my life, and once I achieve that, then I'll get involved with you to get rid of war. You know this. That's heresy. That's not Christianity. That's not nonviolence. That's a lot of what's happening in the United States, dare I say Canada now, this bourgeois peacefulness. I think it's an aberration of Buddhism, too, which I talk about with Thich Nhat Hanh and Buddhist leaders. Look at the other end of the spectrum. There's a lot of us who are activists, and we're going to change the world. And we're mad and angry, and we're all for peace. It's not working. I thought you'd laugh at that, but maybe I touched a nerve there. So in the United States, the myth of the 1960s, when the students were marching against the war, all that anger and yelling, it does not sustain you for the long haul like Martin Luther King and Gandhi. Archbishop Tutu should be, these great peacemakers should be raging lunatics. But they're not. They figured out another way. And that's what I'm interested in. Can you do all three? And that's what I wanted to invite us to do. So when I think of nonviolence, when I define nonviolence, I'm talking about universal love in pursuit of the truth of our common unity, if you're with me, that we're all one. Every human being on the planet is equal, and we're all sisters and brothers of one another. You all know this, but we want to start saying this more and more. This is the underlying spirituality of active nonviolence. We're all one. And isn't it so exciting in our lives, especially as religious and as mystics and contemplatives, to go deep into the truth of our common unity? Because don't you see, as you get older, that everyone is the face of God. Everyone is Christ. And you want to widen it? You are one with the creatures. You are one with Mother Earth. It's so darn beautiful. How could you ever hurt anybody ever again? Much less be silent when there's 35 wars, nuclear weapons, billions suffering in poverty, and environmental destruction. So there's nothing passive here. Thomas Merton, do you know him, the great writer? He said our real problem, if we were doing our spiritual work, we'd all fall down and worship each other. We wouldn't get any work done. I thought that was pretty funny. Thank you, Merton. So nonviolence is active love in pursuit of our common unity, the truth of our oneness, which means we stand up publicly and we resist and say no to every form of violence. Whatever you're dealing with, racism and sexism and kids hurting each other, to war and nuclear weapons and the destruction of the earth. No, no, no. And we speak out and lift up a vision of a new world of nonviolence, a new culture of justice and peace. We allow the God of peace to disarm our hearts of the violence inside us and make us instruments of her disarming love. It's lovely. We practice from this day forward, are you with me? Yeah. You left a long time? No. Unconditional, non-retaliatory, sacrificial, all-encompassing, all-inclusive, universal love. Isn't that great? You're looking at me like this guy's had way too much coffee. It's true. But there's one catch, and this is what you're all not going to like, or your friends, or your family, or your people. There is no cause, however noble, for which you and I will ever again support the taking of a single human life. This is the bottom line in nonviolence. No, John, sometimes you got to kill somebody. You got to kill Hitler, or you got to kill Saddam, or Barack Obama said, I will hunt down and kill Osama bin Laden. No, that's the addiction. You and I do not kill. In effect, nonviolence draws a boundary line in the sand. If you think about it, we don't cross there ever again. And if you stay within the gospel boundary of nonviolence, then love is possible. Then compassion. And by the way, then you need God. Because you don't have a gun to defend you. I think if you've got guns, you don't need God. And if you got money, you don't need God. That's another way of putting the Sermon on the Mount. Because your security is in your weapon. If you got thousands of nuclear weapons, you really don't need God. So that's why this is so powerful and connected, and that's why nonviolence deepens our faith. And it's a whole framework. And this is what you will be teaching for the rest of your lives, what you've been about all your lives. But now it's a new language. That's all I'm saying. I don't know if this is helpful, but this is what I think. So here's a quote from Gandhi. If Gandhi were here, how would he define nonviolence? And I will read this. I'll try to read it slowly for the translation, but also you can sit with the words. Nonviolence means avoiding injury to anything on earth, in thought, word, or deed. How's that going for you? Nonviolence cannot be preached, it has to be practiced. So we're talking about living a way of life. Nonviolence is the greatest and most active force in the world. Gandhi said this is the methodology of God, and through active nonviolence, you have more power than all the weapons of the world combined. What? So he's saying when Rosa Parks, remember in the civil rights story, refused to give up her seat when arrested, she's more powerful than the generals, and she brought down the whole segregation system. In that moment, if you haven't the third eye, if you have a vision, the power of Rosa Parks there, and you can say the power of all of you, and you all know your own stories of nonviolence. Now this just kills me here. This is Gandhi. One person who can express nonviolence in life exercises a force superior to all the forces of brutality. Isn't that great? Is he right? Do you believe it? I invite you to ponder it. My optimism rests on my belief in the infinite possibilities of the individual to develop nonviolence. We're talking about God here. The more you develop nonviolence in your own being, I'm talking about going deep into the infinite well of love and truth, the nonviolence inside you, allowing God to really shine through you. The more infectious it becomes till it overwhelms your surroundings and oversweeps the world. And that's what you see Gandhi did. Gandhi walked in the room and everybody's lives were changed. And the British left India nonviolently. This is what we're talking about. It's a methodology. So I want to talk now, if you're still with me, about being nonviolent toward ourselves. And then after the break, we'll be talking about nonviolence in all our relationships and to the creation. And then being part of the movement, the movement, the movement. Is this okay? Are you all with me? You're being very nonviolent so far. I'm trying to make them laugh here, Doris, and it's not working. No, it's not working. It's lost in the translation. But you speak English. So the first attribute, practicing nonviolence toward ourselves. Now, for some of you, you're going to look at me like, what are you talking about? You know, the Dalai Lama, it's taken him 40 years to realize how crazy and sick people from the United States are. Because in his life in Tibet, and maybe you've experienced in India or elsewhere, there's no problem with yourself. But in the U.S., we're all depressed, suicidal, violent, no self-esteem, real low self-hatred. Now look, so if I'm talking about three things, some of this may not be applicable to you, but it's a way for you to talk about this publicly because there's always going to be somebody somewhere who's going through this. In the United States, a real problem is we're all full of violence, real self-hatred. Why? Because we were raised in violence. We were all victims. But I think now every human being on the planet is somehow a victim of violence. Whether from being hurt by your parents or your brothers or sisters from the culture. And maybe it was sexism or racism, or maybe it was actual war and torture. Somehow or other you've been hurt and you're wounded. And my friend, Father Henry Nouwen, said the choice is, are you going to be a wounded wounder or a wounded healer? Very important. And if you're going to go out and be apostles of nonviolence to the whole world, let's just say you're going to take on Haiti. I'm just saying. You better be doing your inner work. So we're talking about the first attribute. How can we non-cooperate with our own inner violence? Isn't that an interesting idea? Does this make sense? Yes. None of you have this problem? I'm talking about not beating yourself up anymore. Not putting yourself down. Being nonviolent to yourself. Cultivating interior nonviolence. To put it even simply, to make peace with yourselves. I mean, this is the teaching. I'm just using language. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. Make peace, well, make peace with yourself too. How can we, and I'm on the journey much more than all of you. How can we be forces of peace in the world when we hate ourselves and we're beating ourselves up? Okay, so you have a nice day at the peace conference, you get in the car and you want to run somebody over. And then you say, oh, what a terrible person I am, and you beat yourself up a second time, and then you feel guilty about it. No, none of that anymore. We can give ourselves a break. Let ourselves off the hook. My friend, the great Buddhist Zen master, Thich Nhat Hanh, says, look deeply within. I love that phrase. This is a methodology about our interior life. What's going on? Why am I putting myself down? Why do I feel so bad about myself? We're talking about growing in awareness and light and being conscious. Carl Jung taught about he had this incredible phrase that children, I can't say it correctly, but are born unconsciously conscious. And then, like all of us, we spend our entire lives consciously unconscious. The spiritual journey and the life of nonviolence is to be consciously conscious. Does this make sense? Yes. So we're not going to be violent to ourselves, and we're not going to be violent toward others, and we're going to give our lives for Jesus' new world of nonviolence. Are there any questions? Isn't that lovely? Now, so these are my questions for you. We're talking about how can you be more nonviolent to yourself and to teach this with your people. When you're with your kids, teach them to be nonviolent to themselves as you're teaching them to be nonviolent toward others. To be kind to yourself, to have mercy to yourself, to forgive yourself, to cultivate inner peace and nonviolence. To think, why am I like this? What happened to me? What happened to you? How were you wounded? And how can you be on that inner journey of healing so that we can be mindful? We're talking about learning from the Buddhists and Thich Nhat Hanh the way of mindfulness so that we can be the peace we want politically for the world. To radiate personally the peace we seek politically. Because as I said, when you stand up and you're going to stand up against Trump or something or other in Haiti or somewhere, they don't want to give you the Nobel Peace Prize. They're going to hit you or yell at you or you're going to get kicked out of your church. And if you're not trying to be nonviolent interiorly, it's going to trigger that wound from when you were 5 years old and you're going to strike back. This is how Gandhi and Dr. King did it. They were natural-born Buddhists, I think. To be really conscious, okay, that's triggering me, but I'm maintaining my conscious nonviolence. Things like that. Well, this means we have to be contemplatives of nonviolence. So you've all spent your whole life on a spiritual journey of prayer. Now I invite you to add into the mix. How do you pray? What does the so-called spiritual life mean for you? And what the heck does it have to do with nonviolence? What's the point of going to Mass or taking private time with God, and then you go out and you're horrible to everybody and you're horrible to yourself, or you're all for war and killing? I was saying last night at dinner I was in a monastery 20 years ago, and the abbot came up to me and said, Father John, 4 of us in the monastery professed your vow of nonviolence for Pax Christi. And I said, oh, that's great. And then I went, 4 of you? There's 100 monks there. What about the other 96? Oh, they're all for war and killing people. In America, we just come right out and say in the States, That's what I'm talking about. We miss the whole point of religious life or Christianity or being human. Friends, I'm just talking about the holy has created human beings to be nonviolent. I'm talking about love and truth, but peaceful, but the words are so complicated. So to be nonviolent. So the only way, as you know better than me, to deepen our interior nonviolence is through our prayer, our contemplative practice, our meditation. You know all of that. I just invite you to ponder the connection. So for me, I am a kindergarten level person of prayer. That's how I was trained in the Jesuits. I just go and sit with Jesus, and I tell him all my problems, and he goes, "Oh, you're doing fine." And I go, "You say that to everybody." Oh, no, I don't say that. No, I'm just with God. Prayer is a relationship. You know that. But if you want to reflect on your relationship with God, do it as a person of violence, because we're all addicted to violence. We want to come in our brokenness and our violence to the God of peace and let it all go. Let it all go. Let it all go. What is your image of God? The spirit of love, a mother God, father God, or the nonviolent Jesus? Hand over your hurts, your wounds, your brokenness, your anger, your revenge, your bitterness. I want to get back at that person. Or for a lot of people, I hate myself so much. Keep letting it go and letting the nonviolent risen Jesus give you his resurrection gift of peace. Prayer is the journey of the disarming of the heart. You know, it's an inner disarmament, and then you're being sent out to be instruments of God's disarming love. Well, how is that going for you? And you know, if you get stuck in your prayer, it's usually because God is up there going, I really want to disarm you of that one thing, but you don't want to go there, and you're resisting it. And then we just keep it's just another way of looking at it. Violence. We're used to violence. We like violence, actually. We just don't know what it means to be so disarmed, so nonviolent, so centered, and so peaceful. You and I want to model this and then teach it. How does that sound? Isn't that, these are very simple things I'm talking about here. And it leads to questions of, well, that we're going to get into this afternoon in the Sermon on the Mount. Who is your God? I mean, is your God violent or nonviolent? And Gandhi said in the end, everything comes down to your image of God. And Jesus, the scandal of Christianity is Jesus announces that God is nonviolent. And we don't want that. We much prefer a God that's going to be mean and get at least them and throw them into hell. But we're always on edge, too, that God is going to be mean to us. But has God ever been mean to you? I know that's a stupid 5-year-old question, but if you look at it, I invite you to reflect on your experience of the nonviolence of God, how God always loves you and is trying to heal you and lead you toward peace, and that God wants that for every human being. And you and I are ministers of this God of peace. These are lovely questions. So, well, I'm looking at the time, and it's about, I think, 5 of 10. So I was trying to talk just now a little bit about nonviolence in general and how do you define it. And I'm saying there are these 3 attributes, and I just spent a few minutes looking at nonviolence to yourself. But I'm not saying we're just going to work on ourselves for the rest of our lives and then be part. No, I'm just saying you have to do all 3 of those things. So what I would like to do, if you're okay with this, is I'm going to tell you my questions. They're going to have you turn and talk to somebody. Then we're going to open it up for a little bit of a large group discussion, if that's okay. And then we're going to take a 15-minute break. Is that okay, Doris? Does that sound good with everybody? My questions for you are, how do you define nonviolence? You've just written all this lovely stuff up there. What does that mean for you? And I've tried to define it for you. And you know, friends, I've been experimenting about this in all my life with my parishioners or publicly. I find it works, especially with young people, to say, well, I'm a big name dropper. I talk about Jesus, Martin Luther King. What did Martin Luther King mean when he talked about nonviolence? I say that to young people, and they wake up because they get it. And so I invite you to use this word and get your people to define it. That's a good opening. Secondly, how do you practice nonviolence to yourself? Where right now is the violence lingering in you? And how can you, I don't know, receive God's nonviolent love? Let God disarm your heart. Be more nonviolent to yourself so that you can be more nonviolent toward others. And all of this is practice. It's all practice, practice, practice. Because if you're practicing a little bit on the small issues of violence inside you, or the big issues, you'll be ready for a day when it's harder, when big things happen, you know. And the same when you're practicing nonviolence on smaller issues with difficult people in your life. It's all training for the harder moments or the bigger things. And the point is to become as nonviolent, therefore as loving and peaceful as possible. So having said that, I like this little exercise because we don't have much time. It's about 10 o'clock. I'm just going to invite you to turn to one another, but here's how you do it. Now, just humor me because I'm a overprivileged white male cleric from the United States, so you know all of this way better than me, and I have a lot of nerve saying anything in front of you holy peacemakers. But here goes. You each just speak for a minute. You turn to one person, and one person, you just share any thoughts you have of what anything I've said about nonviolence or nonviolence to yourself. But the trick is actually the other person. The other person listens and doesn't say anything, but really listens. You're really compassionately present. There's no judgment. And that's such a helpful healing thing. And then I'll just say, okay, time's up. Now you turn and switch. And you really listen, let the other person talk, just to share some. And this gets everybody a chance to say something. And then we'll open it up for like 10 minutes of questions and conversation. Then we're going to get a break and have more coffee. Okay, so turn to one another and you have a minute or two to talk about these things.